Silence is something we think we understand. We experience it every day in small, harmless doses. Late at night, when traffic fades. Early mornings, before the world fully wakes up. Brief moments when noise retreats and leaves us alone with our thoughts. But what we call silence is rarely real. Even in the quietest bedroom, there is the hum of electricity inside the walls. The distant echo of engines far away. The subtle sound of your own breathing. Silence, as we know it, is never complete. It is always interrupted. Always softened. True silence is something else entirely. It is not the absence of noise. It is the absence of reference. A state where the brain loses one of its most important anchors to reality. A condition the human mind was never designed to endure for long. And yet, on this planet, there exists a place where sound does not behave the way it should. A room so quiet that it forces the mind to turn inward, against itself. This place is known as the anechoic chamber. At first glance, it looks unimpressive. No dramatic architecture, no darkness, no obvious threat, just walls, floors, and ceilings covered in strange, jagged shapes. Geometric wedges designed to absorb sound completely. Inside, echoes do not exist. Sound waves are swallowed before they can return. Clap your hands, and the sound dies instantly. Speak, and your voice feels wrong, flat, unnatural, incomplete. There is no feedback, no confirmation that the world heard you. For most people, the experience is unsettling within seconds, not because something happens, but because something doesn't. The brain, deprived of external sound, begins searching for stimulation. When it finds none, it does what it has always done to survive. It creates its own. At first, the sensations are subtle. The faint ringing that many people already carry but rarely notice. A soft pulse in the ears. The sound of blood moving through vessels near the skull. Then the body becomes louder. You hear your own heartbeat, not emotionally, but mechanically. A dull, rhythmic thump that feels too close, too internal. Breathing transforms from background noise into a dominant presence. Each inhale feels exaggerated. Each exhale feels exposed. The body, usually silent, becomes impossible to ignore. For some, this is fascinating. For others, it is deeply disturbing. Because sound does more than entertain us. It locates us. It reassures us that we exist in a shared space. That we are not alone. Remove sound, and the sense of isolation intensifies instantly. In an anechoic chamber, you cannot hear movement outside. You cannot tell how big the room truly is. You cannot even trust your own voice to confirm your presence. Without echoes, the brain struggles to judge distance. Space collapses inward. The world feels smaller, closer, more intimate in a way that feels invasive. Minutes stretch. Time behaves differently when there are no auditory markers, no footsteps, no shifting air, no cues to signal change. Seconds blur together. The passage of time loses its rhythm. This is when the psychological effects begin to deepen. People report dizziness, disorientation, a growing sense of vulnerability. Some feel as if they are floating. Others feel as if the room itself is pressing inward. The silence becomes heavy. Not metaphorically. Physically, the brain relies on sensory input to maintain balance and orientation. Without sound, that system destabilizes. Your own body becomes the loudest object in existence, and that realization is profoundly uncomfortable. For many, anxiety emerges without warning. A tightness in the chest, a sudden urge to move, to speak, to make noise, any noise, just to break the void. This is not panic in the traditional sense. It is something more primitive, a biological protest against sensory deprivation. And yet, despite all this, people still believe they could endure it. That with enough mental discipline, enough curiosity, enough willpower, they could remain calm, until they try. Over the years, scientists and engineers have measured how long humans can remain inside the quietest rooms on Earth. Not locked in, not restrained, free to leave at any moment. And almost no one lasts more than 45 minutes. Not because they are weak, but because silence at this level is not passive, it is active. It forces confrontation. With the body, with the mind, with thoughts that normally stay buried beneath layers of noise. Inside that room, there is nowhere to hide. No distractions, no digital comfort, no background sound to soften uncomfortable thoughts, no escape from the internal narrative. Every insecurity becomes louder. Every unresolved memory surfaces. Every small fear gains clarity. Silence strips away illusion. And what remains is not peace, but exposure. This is why the anechoic chamber is more than a scientific tool. It is a psychological threshold, a place where the human mind is pushed toward limits it rarely encounters in the modern world. We live surrounded by noise, artificial soundtracks to our lives, music, notifications, voices, engines, endless digital chatter. Silence has become something we avoid, not something we seek. The quietest room on earth is the opposite of modern existence. It removes everything we use to regulate ourselves. And when that happens, the question is no longer how quiet the room is. The question becomes, how quiet can you survive? Silence is not the absence of noise. It is the absence of reference. The quietest room on earth was never designed to feel calm. It was designed to be accurate, precise, unforgiving. Every surface, every angle, every material inside it exists for a single purpose: to remove sound from existence as completely as physics allows. This room is called an anechoic chamber. Unlike normal rooms, sound does not bounce here. There is no echo, no reverberation, no fading tail. When a sound is made, it does not travel outward and return. It is absorbed instantly as if it were erased mid-existence. The walls are covered with deep, wedge-shaped foam, arranged in sharp geometric patterns that look almost aggressive. These wedges are not decoration. They are acoustic traps, engineered to capture sound waves and prevent them from reflecting back to the listener. The floor is not solid. It is a suspended metal mesh, elevated above layers of sound-absorbing material. When you step inside, your feet do not meet resistance in the way your brain expects. There is no familiar feedback, no grounding. Before anything happens, the room already feels wrong. Most people expect silence to feel peaceful, comforting, like rest. This room destroys that illusion. In normal environments, silence still contains information. There is distant traffic, the low hum of electricity, air moving through vents. These subtle sounds give the brain spatial confirmation. They tell you where you are. They tell you that the world continues beyond your body. Inside the quietest room on earth, those signals disappear. The first sensation people report is not silence, but imbalance. Your footsteps produce no sound. Your voice feels disconnected from your body, as if it were being swallowed before it reaches your own ears. Speaking becomes uncomfortable, even unsettling. Many people stop talking within seconds. Without echoes, sound loses direction. You can tell how close or far anything is, or if anything exists beyond your immediate perception. The room feels infinite and claustrophobic at the same time. Then something else happens. You begin to hear yourself, not in a poetic sense, in a physical one. Your breathing becomes loud, unnaturally loud. Each inhale sounds like wind forced through a narrow tunnel. Each exhale feels amplified, intrusive, impossible to ignore. Soon after, the heartbeat emerges. At first, it's distant, a dull internal rhythm. But without external noise competing for attention, the sound grows. It feels closer, more intimate, as if your body is forcing you to listen. Blood moving through veins becomes audible. Swallowing feels exaggerated. Small muscle movements generate sound. The body reveals itself in ways most people never experience. The room does not give you silence. It gives you your own biology, unfiltered. Anechoic chambers were built for engineers and scientists, to test speakers, to measure microphones, to isolate vibration for research. They were never intended as psychological environments, but the human mind does not care about intent. When people enter the room, the brain immediately begins searching for structure. It expects sound to behave in familiar ways. When those expectations are violated, the nervous system reacts. Orientation weakens. Without auditory feedback, balance becomes unreliable. Some people feel the floor tilting, even though it is perfectly stable. Others describe a floating sensation, as if gravity itself were uncertain. Vision sharpens unnaturally as the brain attempts to compensate. Details feel aggressive. Depth perception becomes distorted. Sight tries and fails to replace sound. Time begins to behave strangely. Without external rhythm, minutes lose their boundaries. Some people feel trapped in a single endless moment. Others experience time accelerating, slipping through their awareness uncontrollably. And then slowly, the mind does what it has always done when deprived of information. It creates it. At first, the sounds are subtle, a faint ringing, a low hum, a pressure that feels like sound without volume. Many assume the noise comes from the room. It doesn't, it comes from the brain itself. Human perception evolved in environments full of sound. Wind, water, animals, voices. Absolute silence is not neutral. It is interpreted as danger. Silence means vulnerability. It means something is wrong. Without sound, the brain cannot predict. And without prediction, anxiety rises. People shift their weight, pace slowly on the suspended floor, sit down, stand back up. They search for something to anchor themselves to. Stillness does not help, because the room is not the threat. The threat is what happens when there is nothing left to distract you from your own internal noise. This is why the quietest room on earth is not advertised as an experience. It is not entertainment. Access is controlled. Time inside is monitored. Not because the room is physically dangerous, but because the human mind was never designed to remain there for long. And this is where the limit begins to show. The human brain is not designed to endure nothing. It is designed to interpret, to predict, to compare. It constantly searches for patterns, references, and feedback. When those disappear completely, the brain does not relax. It panics quietly. Inside the quietest room on earth, this panic does not announce itself with sudden fear. It begins subtly, almost invisibly, as the mind turns inward in search of something to hold on to. At first, people believe they are handling it well. They stand still. They slow their breathing. They remind themselves that the room is safe, that nothing is happening, that silence cannot hurt them. But the brain does not respond to reassurance. It responds to stimulus. And here, there is none. Without external sound, attention collapses inward. Every sensation becomes amplified, isolated, impossible to ignore. The body becomes the loudest object in the room. The heartbeat emerges first, not as a gentle rhythm, but as a presence, a pulse that demands awareness. People begin tracking it unconsciously, counting beats, searching for irregularities. A perfectly normal rhythm suddenly feels suspicious. This is how fixation begins. The brain, deprived of new information, turns familiar sensations into potential threats. Breathing follows. Each inhale feels deliberate. Each exhale feels incomplete. Some people become convinced they are breathing incorrectly, even though nothing has changed. The act that keeps them alive becomes a source of anxiety. They try to breathe slower. That only makes it worse. Without realizing it, they have lost automatic function. Every breath must now be chosen. This is exhausting, and it creates a dangerous feedback loop. The more attention placed on bodily processes, the more unnatural they feel. The more unnatural they feel, the more attention they demand. Discomfort grows without a clear source. People shift their weight. They pace carefully across the suspended floor. But movement brings no relief. Footsteps make no sound. The body moves, but the environment does not respond. This breaks a fundamental contract between the brain and reality. Normally, action produces feedback. Sound confirms motion. Echo confirms space. Here, there is nothing. The world feels disconnected from the body. Disorientation follows. Some describe the sensation of shrinking space, as if the walls are closing in. Others experience the opposite, a terrifying sense of infinite openness, as if the room has no boundaries at all. Both sensations are illusions, but the brain treats them as real. Vision attempts to compensate. Eyes scan constantly. Focus sharpens to an uncomfortable degree. But sight alone cannot stabilize perception. Sound is essential for orientation, and without it, balance becomes unreliable. This is when the first internal sounds appear. a faint ringing, a low hum, a pressure that feels like sound without volume. People turn their heads instinctively, convinced something in the room is producing it. Nothing is. These sounds are generated internally, spontaneous neural activity amplified by silence and misinterpreted as external input. The brain hates silence because silence removes correction. In normal environments, imagined sensations are quickly contradicted by reality. In absolute silence, there is no contradiction. The brain becomes both the generator and the judge of perception, and that is dangerous. As minutes pass, thoughts lose their linear structure. Time fragments. Some people feel trapped in a single extended moment. Others feel time accelerating beyond control. Memory becomes unreliable. People forget how long they have been inside. They forget what they were thinking moments ago. Attention loops without resolution. This is when anxiety transforms into something deeper, not fear of the room, fear of the mind. A sense of presence begins to emerge. Vague, undefined, impossible to locate. The feeling that something is just behind you, or just outside your vision. An overwhelming urge to turn around, even when logic says there is nothing there. This sensation is ancient, a survival mechanism triggered by uncertainty. The brain prefers imagined danger to no explanation at all. Heart rate increases, muscles tense, breathing shortens. The body prepares for a threat that does not exist. At this point, most participants reach their psychological limit. They ask to leave, not because they are in pain, not because the room is harmful, but because their mind has begun to operate without restraint. The quietest room on earth reveals something deeply uncomfortable. Silence does not calm the human mind. It removes its boundaries. And without boundaries, the mind turns inward, endlessly, aggressively, and without mercy. The most unsettling part of the quietest room on earth is not what happens inside it. It is what it reveals about the world outside. Modern humans live surrounded by sound. Even in moments we call silence, there is always something filling the space. The hum of electricity, distant traffic, a phone vibrating in a pocket, a notification waiting to be checked. True silence no longer exists in daily life. Our brains have adapted to this constant stimulation. Over time, silence stopped being neutral. It became unfamiliar, and unfamiliarity, for the human nervous system, often translates into threat. When someone enters an anechoic chamber, the shock is not just sensory, it is cultural. The mind expects input. It expects feedback. It expects the environment to respond. When nothing responds, the brain does not relax. It searches. At first, this search feels subtle, a heightened awareness, a curiosity, but quickly, it turns inward. Without external signals to process, attention collapses onto the self. Every thought becomes louder. Every emotion feels closer. Every bodily sensation becomes magnified. There is no distraction to soften them. This is where the modern mind struggles the most. We are no longer trained to sit with uninterrupted awareness. Even boredom has been engineered out of daily life. Waiting rooms have screens. Elevators have music. Moments of stillness are filled instantly. Silence exposes this dependency. Inside the chamber, people report something strikingly similar across cultures and backgrounds. The inability to escape themselves. Thoughts that normally pass unnoticed suddenly demand attention. Regrets resurface. Unresolved fears emerge. Old memories replay without warning. The silence does not create these thoughts. It removes the filters that normally keep them quiet. In the outside world, noise functions as a buffer. It gives the mind something to lean against. It prevents introspection from becoming overwhelming. Inside the quietest room, that buffer is gone. As minutes pass, people begin to realize something deeply uncomfortable. They do not control their own minds as much as they believed. Attempts to think positively fail. Meditation techniques collapse under pressure. Breathing exercises lose effectiveness. The mind resists emptiness. Instead of calm, it produces noise of its own. This is where anxiety takes a unique form. It is not fear of something happening. It is fear of nothing happening. The absence of stimulus creates a vacuum, and the brain rushes to fill it. When it cannot, the sensation feels similar to falling, a loss of ground, a loss of orientation. Time becomes distorted again. Without events to mark its passage, minutes lose meaning. Some people feel trapped in a loop, unsure whether time is moving forward at all. This sensation is psychologically destabilizing. Human identity is tied to continuity, a sense of before and after. Silence disrupts that continuity. It flattens experience into a single, endless moment. For the modern mind, this feels unbearable. Ironically, many people enter the chamber believing they are mentally strong, used to stress, used to isolation, used to being alone with their thoughts. Most discover they are only accustomed to controlled solitude. Silence is different. Silence does not negotiate. It does not comfort. It does not respond. It simply exists. And in its presence, the mind is forced to confront its own structure. This confrontation reveals something unsettling. Constant stimulation has not strengthened us. It has protected us. Noise shields us from internal chaos. It keeps deeper thoughts fragmented and manageable. It prevents emotional accumulation. When that shield disappears, the accumulated weight becomes visible. This is why the experience feels overwhelming so quickly. The anechoic chamber does not break people. It removes the systems that keep them functioning. In a world where attention is constantly pulled outward, silence turns attention inward with no escape. By the 40-minute mark, many participants describe a sense of dissolution. Not hallucination, but disintegration. Thoughts lose coherence. Identity feels less stable. Some describe the fear of losing themselves, even though they remain fully conscious. This fear is ancient. Humans evolved in environments filled with sensory feedback. Complete silence was rare and often dangerous. Our brains were never designed for total sensory absence. Technology has pushed us even further from that state. We live in the loudest era in human history. Not just acoustically, but cognitively. Information never stops. Input never ends. The quietest room exposes how dependent we have become on that noise to remain oriented. It asks an uncomfortable question. If silence alone feels threatening, what does that say about our inner lives? And if we cannot endure 45 minutes without stimulus, what happens when the noise finally stops? There is a reason no one has ever broken the 45-minute barrier in the quietest room on Earth. Not because the body fails, but because the mind reaches a boundary it was never trained to cross. Scientists initially believed that endurance inside an anechoic chamber could be improved with practice, that exposure, repetition, or mental conditioning would slowly increase tolerance. They were wrong. What they discovered instead was something far more unsettling. Repeated exposure did not harden the mind. It made the experience more intense. People who entered the chamber a second or third time did not last longer. Many lasted less. The anticipation alone triggered anxiety before the door even closed. The brain remembers silence as a threat. This is because the anechoic chamber does not behave like normal isolation. In prisons, monasteries, or remote environments, there is still sound, wind, footsteps, echoes, time markers. In absolute silence, those anchors disappear. The mind loses reference points. And without reference points, the sense of self begins to blur. Some participants described a feeling similar to ego dissolution, not in a spiritual sense, but in a destabilizing one. Thoughts no longer felt connected. Memories appeared without context. Identity felt fragmented. This is not hallucination. It is the brain attempting to rebuild meaning without input. At this stage, many report the same core fear. Not that something bad will happen, but that nothing will. The fear of emptiness. Silence forces a confrontation with internal noise, the unresolved emotions, suppressed anxieties, and unexamined beliefs that modern life keeps buried under constant stimulation. In the outside world, we rarely sit with these layers long enough for them to surface. Inside the chamber, they surface all at once. This is why the experience feels overwhelming rather than calming. The popular idea that silence equals peace is incomplete. Silence reveals what peace requires. It exposes how much of our mental stability depends on distraction, phones, music, conversations, even background noise in a cafe. These are not just comforts, they are psychological supports. When they vanish, the mind has to stand on its own structure. And for many people, that structure is weaker than expected. This realization has unsettling implications beyond the chamber. If silence is unbearable, what does that mean for a future where stimulation suddenly disappears? What happens in moments of true isolation? What happens when technology fails, networks go down, or attention is no longer externally guided? The quietest room becomes a metaphor, not for silence itself, but for what lies beneath our noise. In recent years, researchers have begun using controlled silence as a diagnostic tool, not to push limits but to observe mental resilience. The results are consistent. People who struggle most are not the anxious or the introverted. They are the constantly stimulated, those who rarely experience boredom, those who fill every gap with content, those who avoid stillness at all costs. Silence unmasks avoidance. It shows how much of modern identity is built around constant engagement, reacting, scrolling, consuming. When reaction stops, the self has nowhere to hide. This is why the chamber feels hostile. It does not attack, it reflects. The mind, left alone, becomes its own environment. And not everyone likes what they encounter there. The 45-minute limit is not a record to be broken. It is a warning, a signal that human consciousness, in its current form, is deeply dependent on external input. We have evolved tools to fill silence faster than we evolved the ability to endure it. In a world growing louder every year, the quietest room reminds us of a forgotten skill, the ability to be alone with ourselves, not distracted, not entertained, not interrupted, just present. Perhaps the question is not why no one lasts longer than 45 minutes, but why silence feels so foreign to us now, and what we lose when we never face it. If you found yourself uncomfortable listening to this story, that reaction matters. It means the boundary is not theoretical, it is personal, and it is closer than we think. If you want to keep exploring the psychological limits that define what it means to be human, the edges where comfort breaks and truth begins, consider subscribing to the channel. This is where we slow down, look deeper, and examine the thresholds we rarely talk about. Because sometimes, the most disturbing discoveries are not hidden in the world. They are already inside us,